Hey guys, it's Frederik from the FWX podcast. On the podcast, I've talked a lot about specific kind of words when it comes to storytelling and stories. And I want to continue with that series that I've been working on now. And I'm going to do that by the hand of one of the biggest TV shows ever created, Game of Thrones. And so I've been talking about the show quite a bit now. And there are specific things that I find to this series to be unique that are worth talking about. And so I'm gonna do that with help from the internet and the information I have. Because one of the things I have noticed, and many of you have also noticed about this series, is that there are great battles that take place. And on occasion you do see those happen in other series as well, but not to the extent of this show. And so I want to talk about those. But before I start, if you like this kind of content, you can like this video. You can also subscribe to the channel if you like. And you can also comment about it in the comment section. Okay, here we go. So I'm gonna talk about these battles as they are in the show, not the books. And also important is that something you should know from me, I haven't read the books, so I don't know every story by heart, but I will try my best to convey to you what I think about these things. And also, I used to be a huge gamer, big strategy gamer, and so I will try to talk about these things, the battles, in a way that is interesting from a strategic standpoint, but also depending on the story as well, of course. Okay. So these are likely in chronological order or not. But let's start talking about one of the first battles that we see, and that is the Battle of the Blackwater, which takes place near King's Landing. And it is by the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, which is a river that is close by. And so, this is in episode 9 of season 2 of Game of Thrones. And what happens here is that the Baratheons are in line right now. Specifically Stannis, having executed, or rather eliminated, his brother, Renly. And he has so secured his holdings on the Stormlands and the Reach. And now he's attacking King's Landing by both land and sea, as he has commanded his fleet to attack King's Landing, the city that the Lannisters hold. And so he is the main opponent, the main commander of the fleet in Blackwater Bay of Blackwater. And he has sent his troops to go and assault King's Landing. And the main person defending King's Landing is Tyrion, the impish son of Tywin, who really shows off what he can in a battle and as a strategic and willing and cunning individual. And he shows off some elaborate plans of his. For instance, as the troops storm the beach and the other ships are still coming, he asks his right-hand man, Bronn, to fire at a specific place in Blackwater. And the arrow hits a barrel of wildfire And this ignites the trap that Tyrion has laid for these troops. And this engulfs the whole fleet, or most of it, in greenish fire. And that is, by the way, an incredible visual. And that is an incredible moment, of course. And that comes to all the soldiers getting their footing on the beach, and they storm the city, specifically the part where the Lannister forces are, and they are trying to hold back the people, the soldiers of Baratheon, and they're trying to hold back. And by the way, Tyrion has this amazing speech that he gives, trying to hold back the Baratheon army, and they're momentarily overwhelmed. Then there's that speech, and Tyrion finds himself on the beach himself, and here he gets whacked in the head with an axe, and he gets that big scar. Well, at first it's a wound, of course, but it later becomes a pretty big, cool scar. And he finds himself in a moment of despair and desperation, and then his reinforcements come to his aid with his father and with Loras Tyrell, and they turn the tide of the battle. This forces Stannis to retreat, and he does with whatever forces he has left. And so this consolidates the Lannister control over King's Landing and weakens Stannis' claim to the Iron Throne, as he is incapable of taking over the city. And so he turns tail and turns back to the Stormlands. So this is an interesting first battle. And of course there's the great visuals of the green wildfire, of course, lighting up the fleet, including Davos Seaworth. And he goes into the sea like many other soldiers do, but he manages to survive later. And so that's a very cool battle, obviously. I think the main nitpick here is, of course, that there's moments where it gets too dark, where you barely see anything. But then the contrast of the green flames make it an interesting visual. And of course, there's that battle that takes place, which means that there's a lot of blood and there's a lot of grunting and loss of limbs and all of that. So that's unfortunate, of course. But the Lannisters do manage to hold their own. Specifically Tyrion, who didn't have any battle experience before, as far as I know. And I did say I was going to talk about this strategically. This is a concept and a scenario where you basically have, well, I think Napoleon said it best, the best defense is a good offense. So by attacking, you're also defending, basically. And that is not completely true. Because if you're on a ship and you're at the disadvantage because your enemies have artillery, they can easily get you to sink with your plans along in the ocean, or sea in this case. And so that's what happens in this battle. Okay, let's move on to the next battle. And the next one I want to talk about happens in episode 9 of season 4, and I'm talking about episode, The Watchers on the Wall, which is the battle at Castle Black. This is when Mance Rayder sends his troops to go and attack the Night's Watch. Yes. And this is another visually interesting battle because it takes place in a lot of snow, of course, and you have the giant frozen wall, which serves as a front and backdrop at the same time because you also have moments that happen on the wall. And so the opposing force is Mance Rayder with his wildlings and his other forces that he has there, including some giants. And they attack in 2 waves, while you have the Night's Watch with Jon Snow as a commander overseeing the defense of Castle Black. Yes. And this takes place, of course, in the north. This is a map of the Westeros, by the way. So that's right here in supposedly Stark territory. But of course, near the there's a place, there's a name for this place where they are. By the way, this battle is also known as the Battle for the Wall, because, as I just said, there's a giant piece of the wall there at Castle Black. And so Mance Rayder sends his troops there, trying to breach the watch and overwhelm the Night's Watch because they have lesser numbers and he has many more. But Jon, being a commander and well trained in martial arts and is a good sword fighter, manages to hold them back for quite a while. And he plays a very pivotal role here. And we get scenes where they use the artillery that they have on their side of the wall. Because, and we'll talk about the strategic part right here already. Of course, you have the castle, which is already a little bit elevated. But then, of course, you have that patch of the wall where they have to go up with those elevators or lifts or whatever the heck it's called. And so they kind of have the advantage, the Night's Watch, because from high up you can easily send artillery-like equipment to deal with large swatches of hostile forces. And you see that happen in those scenes, of course. And the Night's Watch and Jon and his guys, his commanders, managed to hold them back. Of course, not without losses, of course, because you do have people from the Night's Watch that really do die. Like, for instance, there's that moment, a key moment from the defense here. Donal Noy, I hope I said that right, who goes through a tunnel inside the wall as he... I'm gonna look it up just to be sure what he does. Just to check if... Yeah, so here's a bit more of the breakdown. So, Donal, along with a few others, one of the other men is someone called Spotted Bates. They're tasked with defending the tunnel in the wall, or beneath the wall, because the wildlings are trying to get through it. And on the opposing side with the wildlings, there's a giant called Magtur. This is a long name, I'm trying to make sense of it. There's a giant called Magmartundoweg. He's trying to break down the gates. And Donald and those couple of guys from the Night's Watch go inside the tunnel and try to take care of it, confronting this giant. And he manages to impale this giant in the throat with his sword. But he gets killed by this giant as his spine just gets snapped and crushed. That's the same thing. And the interesting thing is that this is later praised by Stannis as he comes to the aid of the coalition between everyone. Okay, I wanted to mention that because this is a key moment, and this is also something you see in battles, like for instance, you have that moment in the Two Towers from the Lord of the Rings movies where Theoden's men are trying to protect the keep from getting breached, and they're pushing back against a horde of Uruk-hai that is trying to bear down on them with a battering ram. And you have Aragorn and Gimli that go through a secret gate to just outside the walls to surprise these hordes of Uruk-hai with their battering ram. So it's kind of similar to this moment where you have a surprise attack that is delayed. And I say this because it's a surprise upon a surprise in LOTR. Because the main force of the Uruk-hai was coming to the front walls, and they managed to blow that up, of course. But Legolas was firing with his arrows from higher up, while Aragorn and Gimli went to Theoden to help out. And so you have a similar kind of scenario happen here, where the wall is about to get breached, the gate is about to get breached by an overwhelming force. In the show's case, it's that giant, and in the Two Towers, it's that battering ram. But that is then prevented because people intervene. So that's what I'm pointing out here, that sometimes it takes a sacrifice from someone to help out the larger plot, to help out with the defense. Like, do you give your life for your brotherhood, for your fellow men, for those that you have served with? And so I wanted to point that out for a moment. And in the aftermath of this battle, the Night Watch, which was already quite outnumbered, they do suffer some more damage. While Jon is chosen as the new Lord Commander, as the head of the Night Watch. Okay, so that's battle number 2. Let's talk about the next one. And that is the Battle of Hardhome. That is when Jon goes to recruit the wildling army that is at the place of Hardhome, which is like, I would say, like a large town, basically. And he and a couple of others, like Tormund, go there to try and convince the wildlings to help the Night Watch while the White Walkers are coming after them. But then the White Walkers and their whites show up at Hardhome with a surprise attack. And we get moments in the show where they fight, and Jon displays some strength here, because he has a special kind of sword made from Valyrian steel that can actually defeat a white and a Nightwalker too, maybe. Well, yes, it does actually, but we'll later find that out, of course, in the series. Spoilers if you haven't seen it, but ultimately Arya does stab the Night King with a dagger, the prophesized dagger. Yes. Okay. So the battle at Hardhome is named like that, but actually it turns into a horrific slaughter of those wildlings that are present, and all of them get killed, while Jon and a few of the survivors manage to escape on the ships that were present, only to look back and see that those killed wildlings are brought back to life by the Night King who's present. And what's important here, of course, is that shows just how dangerous the White Walkers are and what they can do. They can bring back the dead, and that they now have an even larger army of undead wildlings as well. And that's also where that episode ends. By the way, this was in episode 8 of season 5. Yeah. And it basically ends. That episode ends with the Night King reanimating all those wildlings to become part of his bigger army. Okay, let's talk about the next. Wait. Before I go any further, I need to talk about the strategy here, of course. It's a pretty smart one on behalf of the Night King, and I can't believe I'm defending the Night King here. Also, pretty desperate move from Jon to go beyond the wall again and try and convince those wildlings that they should come and help them. But then they show up already, the White Walkers, and ravage and destroy the wildlings. Okay. So, basically a giant ass ambush. Pretty smart from a strategic point. Okay, the next battle we can talk about, likely the most known battle, is the Battle of the Bastards, which is an interesting one to begin with. And it's also in two parts. There's a part that takes place in Meereen on Essos with Daenerys and Tyrion, with Grey Worm and the Unsullied and Missandei, as they meet up with the Masters and take care of them. And end up with a new ally in Theon and Yara. But the really interesting part is what happens at Winterfell. So basically what happens is that Jon meets up with Theon. So I'm sorry, I said Theon. I meant Ramsay Bolton. And there's that scene where he and Sansa and a few others go to meet with Ramsay on the battlefield. Like, negotiating basically what to do to prevent this battle from even happening. And Ramsay clearly states that we have the numbers. We will destroy you. And you will be ours before the end. Like, he has bigger plans, basically, for Jon. Which he implies. He doesn't exactly say it, but that is what it comes down to. And Jon acknowledges this, like, yes, you do have the larger numbers, that's true. But we do not have to do that. We could do this mano a mano, not his exact words, of course, but that is what he thinks is the better idea, of course, to just fight, sword to sword, man to man. And that would have been cool too, because personally, I am a huge fan of sword fights in any medium, especially in visual, both in series and in movies. And that would have been dope as fuck. But then we wouldn't have had that incredible battle. So they have their battle, and Ramsey taunts John, of course, by saying that, oh, I still have something of yours, and that is Rickon, of course. And Ramsey gives Rickon and John a final choice, like, come and get him, John. Come and get your Stark brother, you bastard. And of course he lets Rickon go. Rickon yells as fast as his feet can carry him to John. John is on his horse, hauling ass. And Ramsey, meanwhile, is also shooting arrows at Rickon. And finally, as John is about to catch Rickon, Ramsey shoots Rickon dead with an arrow, leaving John straight forward in a red rage, I will call it, because he's intent to killing Ramsey at this point. But then those other archers that Ramsey has under his command shoot their arrows in volley after volley, and John's horse gets hit. He manages to skid off. That's maybe not the right term for it. But he does get off the horse. He's practically launched off the horse because it's just hit as much as it can with any arrow that was just shot. And he's about to take his stand, and also an amazing shot of him holding up his sword, about to hold off an entire army by himself. I should have printed that picture out because it's a good one. But I think everyone knows that shot. And he draws a long claw, is about to just do this on his own, which I now recognize kind of resembles a little what happens with Captain America in Avengers Endgame, where he and Tony and Thor have been fighting against Thanos for a while, but then he gets knocked back a lot with Mjolnir at his side and his shield all battered up. And so that's a similar kind of scenario right here. But then also he gets his reinforcements as his Nightwatch wildling army just mashes into the oncoming Bolton cavalry. And there's this giant wall of corpses of everyone on both sides that starts to create itself, basically. As if the giant frozen wall were there, but then in a circle. And John ends up underneath those corpses and tries to claw out, of course. And things seem dire as they are all pushed together in something. There's a technique specific to this, because well, let me set the scene for a moment. So John was about to take on this whole army on himself. The cavalry from Ramsey came in, and John's army was behind him. The wildlings in the Night Watch and whoever else, like his close allies, just mashed together. That created that wall of corpses, basically. And then the infantry from Bolton, Ramsay Bolton, is sent, and they start to use this wall to encircle the Wildling Night Watch army, and they do this in what is called a kettle formation, which is a tactic for handling large crowds. And this is something that also happens in real life, by the way. This is a police tactic that we use in our real life. But of course, they do it medieval style, so it's infantry with large shields and large spears, trying to take out anyone that comes too close. And a couple of characters from the Wildling Night Watch army try to get out, like for instance that giant that got along with this army. And everything is about to get even worse, and all of them think that, of course. But then their reinforcements arrive with the Knights of the Vale, which Sansa and Littlefinger have brought along, and the tide turns for the supposed good guys in this scenario. I say good guys with quotations because I didn't look at the show from the advantage of one side or the other, just like a larger part, like I've made in my first video about this concept, which was a concept in of itself, because, well, you can go watch that video if you like, after this one, of course. And so they're freed from this wall of corpses and the infantrymen by the Knights of the Vale, which Sansa has her claim to, as a Stark and Tully member. And so that leaves Jon and his troops to go chase after Ramsay, who is returning back to Castle Black. And here, the giant that was with Jon and the army breaks through the gates, and Jon right behind him, while he gets volley after volley of arrows onto him, and he collapses to the ground, and Jon is right behind him with his sword, with Longclaw, and Jon is rightfully pissed and also muddied up by what has happened on that battlefield, and he is provoked by Ramsay, and who has finally decided, by the way, that he does want that one-on-one confrontation now, because he has lost that complete advantage, because all of a sudden he doesn't have the numbers anymore. And so he shoots at Jon with a bow and arrow, and Jon defends himself with a large shield, which is a nice reversal of what has just happened on the battlefield. And Jon gets closer with every arrow that Ramsay shoots, and ultimately pounces on him and beats the crap out of the guy, as the rest of his troops are getting into Castle Black and taking out those remaining archers and crossbowmen. And finally we get a look from Sansa with like, "Can you stop, please? I still have plans with this piece of shit." And Jon does stop after beating Ramsay quite well. And that leaves Sansa with whatever remains of Ramsay. And of course there's that grueling scene where she locks him up with his hounds, and they have their meal. I'll put it like that. Yeah. Which is the end of Ramsay Bolton. Okay. So that's enough about the Battle of the Bastards. I have to say, from a strategic standpoint, this kind of reminds me of seeing the Napoleon movie, specifically the battle at the end of Waterloo, which, funny enough, takes place in the country where I'm from. And there was this way of warfare for a long time where you would send in the cavalry when things get desperate, and then you're all alone for a moment. Of course, by Napoleon's time, you would have artillery and riflemen, of course, and maybe I'm wrong, and if I am, you can comment about that if you like. I'm okay with being, what's the word, proved wrong. Yes, and yeah, so this reminds me of the fact that despite overwhelming numbers, you can still be caught off guard if reinforcements arrive, basically. Yes. So that is enough about the Battle of the Bastards, which is an amazing battle in of itself. You have those amazing shots with John standing in his own, kind of like Captain America in Avengers Endgame. By the way, I've also made videos about the Avengers movies. You can find those on the channel if you like and watch those. But please do that after you watch this video. Okay, let's talk about the next battle that I want to talk about. And that is the Battle of Winterfell, which is also known as the Long Night. And this is, of course, the major conflict at the very finale of the show. It's the climactic battle between a coalition of armies, the Lannisters, the Starks, the Knights of the Vale, the Wildlings, I would call it the Army of the Seven Kingdoms, basically. Combined. Unofficial. Because it's practically everyone for himself or herself. And there's all of them fighting against the Night King and his White Walkers as the name says, it takes place at Winterfell, which is the castle of House Stark, which of course you can see in this picture in this giant region. And so you have two giant armies, well, one a lot more bigger than the other one, that being the Army of the Dead, combination of the Night King with his White Walker army, the Whites being like the reanimated corpses of past enemies. And so this takes place right outside and inside Winterfell. And so it takes place there. And there's a lot more to say about it, but I really want to come about to saying is that this is the big climax, the finale. And so you have everyone gets a turn, everyone gets a scene, everyone important is there. You have all the main characters that are present, except for a few, of course, like Cersei, who is not there. And so the humans are defending Winterfell against the White Walker army and the corpses of their enemies. Um, but what ultimately does them in is that moment, of course, where Arya manages to stab the Night King with her Valyrian steel sword, uh, dagger that held that prophecy that was written on that dagger. And you have several moments in this fight as well. For instance, the Dothraki that charge into what they think are enemies, but is just complete darkness. And the moment the Night King is felled, everyone else of the White Walkers and the Whites end up dead. Of course, from a strategic point, I have to say, along with all the other people that have talked about this, is that there are quite some flaws. For instance, there isn't really like an outside battle. Yeah, that charge by the Dothraki, of course. And the supernatural aspect here of the Night King and his Night Walkers leads to a very unpredictability that they have in their favor. So that it leads to him coming into the castle and specifically inside the Godwood as he's about to take hold of Bran. And you have then Arya all of a sudden there, which is also an inconsistency, of course. So, despite some nitpicks here and there, this is still a cool moment because this is what the whole series have been leading up to. And everyone was, well, a lot of people, not everyone, of course, loved the supposed climax here. And I also have to mention, of course, what episode this takes place in. Hold up a second. Episode 3 of season 8. Yes. I think another complaint about this battle is also that it's so damn dark. Of course, there's a lot of fire because of the dragons that are present, Drogon and Rhaegal, while the Night King has control of Viserion, who spits blue fire, and this clash of dragons between the Night King, Daenerys, and Jon is maybe one of the highlights, I think. And it's obviously a bit more colorful because of all the fire. Okay, that seems enough for this battle. Let's talk about the next one. And that is the Battle of Gold Road. The Gold Road. Which is in episode 7. I'm sorry, season 7 in its 4th episode. Named The Spoils of War. And this is well, let me read to you for a moment what it's about. So while Daenerys and Jon are at Dragonstone observing the drawings that were left behind by the children of the forest, which indicated that those first men that were present at the beginning of time on Westeros, they worked with the children of the forest to fight against the White Walkers. And while that is happening, you have Cersei, who is in King's Landing, trying to look for a better investment with the Iron Bank, while Arya returns to Winterfell in the north, and she reunites with her siblings, and has that little spar moment with Brienne of Tarth, who she was under her wing for. And I want to talk here for a moment about the fact that there's quite a few. I've talked about the battles. There's also quite a few duels in this TV show, and that's probably the video I'm gonna make next about it, because there's a lot of them. Like, one of those would be the fight with Brienne and Sandor Clegane. I couldn't think of his nickname for a moment, so I just said his name. Okay. And then also important here is that, and this is the battle, in fact, while Jaime and Bronn and their armies are on the road back to King's Landing, they're caught up by an attack by Daenerys and her dragon, Drogon, and her Dothraki army. Yes. And so this is a caravan that is returning with Jaime and Bronn back to King's Landing with an investment that they had with the Tyrells. And they're then approached by the Dothraki, which is led by Daenerys, like I said, while she's on Drogon's back. And there's incredible moments in those scenes where we have Daenerys has Drogon use Dracarys, so basically setting everything on fire in sight, and specifically the supply train that Jaime was transporting. But in a split moment, we see that Bronn has gotten his hands on one of those scorpions that Qyburn had been working on, and he shoots Drogon with it, wounding the dragon. And that ends with a scene, a more intimate scene, where there's a confrontation between Jaime, Drogon, and Bronn, where basically Jaime's angry that Daenerys sicked Drogon on them, and so he's charging at her. But then Drogon breathes fire. But at the last moment, Jaime is tackled out of the path of the fire, and they go into the Blackwater Rush, which is the river that I've talked about, where that victory was with the Battle of the Blackwater. And Jaime starts to sink under the weight of his armor. And so, this is an interesting one that I think about strategically. One of the ways you could take out any army or any supplies of an army is by going after the supply runs, after whatever resources that is needed. If it's either gold or weapons or artillery, which is of course a form of weapon, but a specific one. In this case, gold from the Tyrells in Dorne, which is this kingdom right here at the very bottom. Yeah. Because if you look at the map, so here's Dorne. That's a this part right here, and right here, that red part, that's King's Landing. So they were bringing this back from that lower part all the way there. So they have been on their way for a good while. And thinking strategically here, that already means that your troops are highly likely very tired, borderline exhausted. So nothing much you can do but just literally setting them on fire, which happens. So if you want to go after your opponent, take out their resources, take out their supply runs, is basically what happens here. As the Dothraki are dealing with their soldiers well, Daenerys is dealing with the leadership. Which reminds me of that saying, if you cut the head off the snake, and that also does a lot of damage, like if you go after leadership, which is a technique that the revolutionaries did in the American Revolutionary War, aka the American Revolution, which won them the war. Okay, enough comparisons in this battle. Let's go to the next one, and I have a few more. Only a few more that I have to talk about now. I want to talk next about a sea battle. Specifically, the Battle of Fair Isle during the rebellion of the Greyjoys. And this saw basically Stannis defeat the Iron Fleet. And this is in episode... let me give you a moment. Just a moment. Come on. Just a second, folks. I'm looking up what episode it was. I know it was early on. Come on. Sorry. Nope. My bad. Not early on. It's in episode 2 of season 7, titled Stormborn. And so this is, like I said, a sea battle. And I wanted to point this out because there aren't a lot of those. It's mostly battles on land when it comes to the show. And so what happens is that Yara and Theon have an uncle, Euron, and he has just built his Iron Fleet in the place that they're from, the Iron Islands. And so Euron is going after Yara and Theon, and he ambushes them. And he easily overtakes the fleet of Yara and Theon. leading to Yara getting captured. And oh yeah, I'm reminded here that in that moment where she is captured, Theon doesn't know what to do in the moment, so he just jumps overboard so he can escape, which is humiliating to begin with. And so, but this battle is specifically interesting because it sets up just how powerful Euron is with his fleet, so that he can ally himself with Cersei. Well, he's also raiding and pillaging other places on Westeros. Yes, and I'm especially reminded of the scene where I think it was him personally, they captured Yara because, well, she is the stronger one of the two. Because Theon, well, he is in an arc of his own after what happens to him. Coming from Winterfell. I wanted to say Castle Blackfrost, but I know that's not right. Because Theon is in this arc where he has been physically emasculated. You know, his parts were taken away from him by Ramsay. And that leads to him fulfilling his arc in the end. I've talked about that battle at Castle Black before, also called the Long Nights. And one of the things that also happens here is that Theon is the one to protect Bran from the Night King, and he dies heroically. He is killed by the Night King, which is pretty personal when you think about it. But at that moment, his arc becomes full circle. Okay. So, there's a few more that I want to talk about. There's also an interesting one, the Siege of Riverrun, which is not that. I'm gonna give you this pertains to the Lannisters specifically, because Tommen has sent his father Jaime to Riverrun to take the castle of the Tullys back so they can serve the crown. In this case, the Iron Throne. This one. Of course, not with Ned Stark in that, of course. But this is also part of, well, after what happened with the Red Wedding and House Frey. I was going to give you the episode. So that is in season 6, episode 7, titled The Broken Man. And so Jaime and Walder Frey lay siege to the castle of Riverrun as they're attempting to take it back by the Freys. But it's being defended by Brynden Blackfish Tully, who is on the other side, but he's still very capable of defending the castle of Riverrun. But what ultimately happens is that one of the other Tullys gives up Riverrun, and that is Admer. Because Jaime is threatening him to kill him and also kill the child that he has that is not yet born. And so there's a siege with the Lannisters and the Freys of Riverrun. I'm reminded he doesn't just straight up die, he is killed because, like I said, despite being older, he is still very much a fighter. So, as the guards of the Lannisters are trying to hold him back, he is taken out. He is killed. But that happens when they overrun Riverrun. Little pun there. I want to say, though, another important fact here, or rather, one of the people involved, Walder Frey, is portrayed by one of the actors you will know from another huge franchise, and that is, of course, Harry Potter. And he's played by David Bradley. And he is... I'm trying to think. I saw Harry Potter initially in Dutch, but Argus Filch, yeah, whatever. Sorry. By the way, Mr. Bradley is also on the older side himself now, at 83, but still working, which is amazing. And he has played many, many roles, of course, including one of a show that I used to watch when I was much younger. Another weird character, the court fool, Will in The Tudors, which is a great series, by the way, that I probably should rewatch. Okay, there's one more thing. There's one more battle that I want to talk about, and that's the battle beyond the wall. And the goal is here that Jon and a group of his allies go beyond the wall so they can capture one of those whites so that they can show it to Cersei, who wants clear evidence of what is happening, of the Night Walkers and his army, and the Night King's army. But this is also I wouldn't say a letdown in terms of the visuals, but it's not completely the same as in the book either. And I know many people would say, like, oh, that's too bad, I'm disappointed, or there are people nitpicking at certain things, but the truth is, an adaptation needs to stand on its own, guys. It can't be exactly the same. Now, some things are exactly the same, and that's what either makes it a good thing or a bad thing, or something in between. So, a little breakdown here of the Beyond the Wall, which is in episode 7, by the way. Season 7, and the 6th episode, titled Beyond the Wall. And so it goes literally like that, what I just said, that Jon and a couple of others go beyond the wall, and they encounter a massive white army while they are trapped on a frozen lake. And you know what, I'll mention the people present for a moment. I'll pull up the picture for a moment for myself. So you have that Dondarrion guy, you got Tormund, you got Jon, you got I'm gonna look this up well for myself for a moment. So John, along with Torment, Jorah Mormont, Gendry, Beric Dondarrion, Taurus of Myr, and the Hounds go beyond the wall to go and capture one of those whites. But unfortunately, they have their own challenges, like a damn bear, and many of those whites, and that results into a lot of kills of the team. Like for instance, Taurus, who was killed by that bear. While also Gendry is sent back to the wall so that he can send a raven to Daenerys for aid and reinforcements, so she can come and rescue the group, and he makes it there right on time, arriving with her dragons, but not without any cost, and that happens by the hand of the Night King, who throws an ice spear at Viserion, who is then killed and also resurrected. I believe that's the very end of that episode, where Viserion's eye turns from red to blue. And also important here is that Jon is sacrificed by is rescued by someone that he is some relation to, supposedly, and that is Benjen Stark, who shows up with like a mace on a horse, who manages to take out a couple of whites, or undead, basically. And that allows Jon to escape. And that leads to, finally, the Night King having command of a dragon, which is dangerous beyond belief. And in the meantime, you also have Arya and Sansa that are pulled away from each other by Littlefinger, who's manipulating the both of them. And finally, Jon also acknowledges the fact that Daenerys is now queen. His queen. Okay, good. So that's all I want to talk about when it comes to the battles. One last thing, though. Was there a strategic advantage in this? I think not. This is basically like a suicide mission, despite having all your heroes, because, as I just said, a couple get killed. Also, the death of a dragon that becomes then an undead dragon is pretty bad, especially if you have to fight those dragons again. Okay, so this is a long episode of the FWX podcast, I know. But if you want, you can sit through this one. And if you did, thank you so much. And before I go, you can like this video. You can subscribe to the channel if you like this kind of content. And if you want more of this, you can also comment in the comment section. You can share this with friends and family and people online. That can be in the comment section right here. Also, look, I'm not perfect. I fumble, I mess up, I get a word wrong on occasion, I have a long pause for moments. That's all human. That's all normal, okay? So, without further ado, thank you so much for listening to all of this. I'm Frederik. This is the FWX podcast, and I will see you in the next video.